Welcome back to Water Quality in the Pacific Northwest. Today we're going to take a look at our first case study with surface water quality in the region. This is lecture 18, again case study number 1. Today we're going to look at surface body of water, Lake Coeur d'Alene in northern Idaho. From the air, Lake Coeur d'Alene is a large sprawling lake. North is on the left side of your photograph, and south is on the right side of your photograph. I had to twist it this way so that you could be able to get an idea of the scope of the length of the lake. If we were to reorient this north-south, over here on the left is the town of Coeur d'Alene and the city of Coeur d'Alene and the sprawl north of the lake. As you go down the lake, land use changes. There's a lot of farmland near the southern end of the lake. This is part of the prairie. You see a lot of wheat fields, bluegrass fields, things like that. It's a pretty complicated system. Lake Coeur d'Alene is known as being a very beautiful lake. Lots of people come here for its beauty. It's very scenic, particularly in the summer months. One of my favorite pictures of Lake Coeur d'Alene is in the evening near sunset, where you really see the magnificent yellow and reddish colors. So to put this in perspective, if we look at the setting, the city of Coeur d'Alene is located at the northern end of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Lake Coeur d'Alene is a major tourist destination in the summer. People use the lake, they sail on the lake, they boat on the lake, they water ski on the lake, they fish on the lake. So lots and lots of people flock to Coeur d'Alene to recreate on the lake. Lake Coeur d'Alene was formed by the Missoula floods that took place between 12,000 and 50,000 years ago. Glacial Lake Missoula lied to the east, and I'll talk a little bit about that in just a moment. So as we put the setting in perspective, again on the northern end of the lake you have the town of Coeur d'Alene. The big feature of Coeur d'Alene is the Hagendone Resort, which is a tower, basically a hotel tower that kind of dominates the water right in the vicinity of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Lake Coeur d'Alene is also famous for a floating hole on its golf course. Another view of the lake, you can see it's very scenic, can be pretty rocky on the edges, lots of coves, lots of recreation to take place. Let's go back to ancient glacial Lake Missoula. To the east of Coeur d'Alene, to the east of Idaho, in ancient times, anywhere from 12 to 16 to 20,000 years ago, there was a large lake. It's called Glacial Lake Missoula, and as the ice ages receded, the snow melted and water formed in this lake. And on the west end of the lake there was a dam, and it was an ice dam. And this ice dam kept the water in Glacial Lake Missoula. It's believed that at least 3 different times the ice dam melted or collapsed. And when it did, this set a flood of water to the west through northern Idaho and eastern Washington, and this formed what's called the channeled scablands. A tremendous amount of water was deposited or flowed through the area in just a matter of a few days. And again, this event took place several different times. They can calculate how fast the water moved. There is a gap in the Columbia Gorge down here. It's called the Walua Gap. And the gap basically limited the amount of water that could flow through the Columbia Gorge at one time. But we do know that the Glacial Lake Missoula flowed through eastern Washington freely and created these ravines, or what we call, or that the land that wasn't in ravines were what like people in the Southwest would call mesas. In eastern Washington, you call them scabs. Also, as the force of the lake, the flood waters moved so fast, some water actually flowed upriver. Some water actually came to the snake and flowed upriver and deposited debris in the Lewiston area. Again, another map of glacial Lake Missoula in a little bit more detail. Here's the lake right here. The dams broke, the water flowed out very, very fast in a 2-3 day period, and it found channels to create in eastern Washington, and eventually the water flowed out to the Pacific Ocean. Well, one of the things that was deposited, one of the water bodies deposited during the glacial Lake Missoula flood was Coeur d'Alene, Lake Coeur d'Alene, which is right here. So that's the origin of glacial Lake Lake Coeur d'Alene. It was derived from the great floods of Lake Missoula. We look at the lake now. People are using the lake all the time. Lots of boats on the lake anytime during the summer. June, July, August, September, high boat traffic. People recreate on it. People water ski. People fish. There's lots of coves, lots to see, lots to do. Again, we look at the setting for a few minutes. Lake Coeur d'Alene is considered one of the most beautiful lakes in the world. Physically, the lake is 25 miles in length from north to south and ranges only from 1 to 3 miles wide. Lake Coeur d'Alene is a natural dam-controlled lake in northern Idaho. There is a spillway on the northern end which turns into the Spokane River. But the lake basically is full all year round. And again, you see people in the warm months of the year out on the lake really enjoying the lake. So if we take a look at the history of Lake Coeur d'Alene, first of all, we know it's a big lake. It's a beautiful lake, and people flock to the lake for recreation. They flock to the lake because the lake looks pretty pristine. From a layman's view, a layperson's view, the lake is deep blue, it's clear, all the things that you would associate with a very desirable body of water. If we look at the history of Lake Coeur d'Alene, in the early 1900s, Lake Coeur d'Alene was very busy. From a shipping standpoint, it had a tremendous amount of traffic on the lake, steamships, a lot of traffic that was tied to harvesting the logs in the surrounding forests. The large commercial timber industry was responsible for most of the traffic on the lake in the early 1900s, and there were mills scattered around the lake. The last big mills are in St. Mary's at the head of the lake and in Coeur d'Alene. Most of the logs were transported by water. They were floated down the lake to mills to process, and then they were shipped to wherever they went in North America. Here's a picture of an old steamer on Lake Coeur d'Alene. Many steamers plied this lake. Lots of tourists, lots of people transported for jobs. Again, we're going back to the turn of last century. Lots of good old boat pictures are available in archives. Here's a historic picture taken, I believe it was in 1902. If we try and comb historical pictures about Lake Coeur d'Alene, we see a lot of logs. Logs are piled into the lake and they floated down the lake to their mills. Okay, let's take a look at some technical information about Lake Coeur d'Alene. Let's look at the setting and the ownership. The lands along the shore of the northern 2/3 of the lake are held by private, state, or federal entities. Lots of private land, lots of people have homes on the lake. There's a lot of state land. There's a lot of federal land in the vicinity of the Lake Coeur d'Alene watershed on the northern 2/3 of the lake. The southern third of the lake is owned by the Coeur d'Alene tribe. It owns the southern third of the lake, and it owns the submerged lands that are part of the lake there. So it's part of the Coeur d'Alene Indian Reservation. Tribal ownership of the land has been contested several times in court. However, the U.S. Supreme Court has held that a 1873 executive order issued by President Grant formalized tribal ownership of the southern third of the lake. We look at another map. Here in the center, you can see that this blue spot, this is Lake Coeur d'Alene. The northern 2/3 of the lake in the lighter brown are private, public, federal, state ownership. The area in the southern third of the lake in the darker brown area and the land to the south is part of the Coeur d'Alene Native American Reservation. So they're split ownership. The tribe demands certain types of practices to protect the watershed. Different types of practices are seen on the private, state, and federal lands to the north. Again, another map of the lake, more of a topographic map. You can see that the area surrounded by the purple boundary is part of the Coeur d'Alene Native American Reservation. And once you get north of that line, you go into private, public, federal ownership. Now, there's a reason why we talk about Lake Coeur d'Alene from a surface water quality standpoint. The lake has two major issues that we're going to touch on in this case study. The first issue is a very major issue. It's heavy metal pollution of the lake. There are heavy metals in the sediment at the bottom of the lake. These heavy metals are not natural. They were not just natural because of the geologic formation of the lake. They were put there basically by humans. And the reason why these sediments that were laden with heavy metals got there was a consequence of the mining industry upstream. And that is an issue. And when we talk about heavy metals, we're talking about lead, we're talking about cadmium, we're talking about arsenic, we're talking about mercury. We can put zinc in that category also. So there's a concern about the heavy metals in the sediment of the lake. The sediment at the bottom of the lake does nothing to detract from the beauty of the lake. As long as the sediments at the bottom of the lake are undisturbed, it's believed that the quality of water in the lake is pretty good. So that's the first issue. The second issue has to do with phosphorus. Increased phosphorus additions to Lake Coeur d'Alene result in the heavy metals in the sediments at the bottom of the lake becoming water soluble and actually solubilizing in the lake water, which causes a water quality issue. And again, phosphorus is a nutrient that all plants and animals require. When it's in its place in the soil producing plants or in humans in our body's metabolism, ADP, ATP, very important things that contain phosphorus, it's considered very good. However, we get phosphorus out of place, we get phosphorus in the water, we have a lot of environmental issues that are associated with it and associated with the water quality of the lake. Okay, let's look at the cause of heavy metal pollution in Lake Coeur d'Alene. If we look at the history of mining in the region, upriver, there is a mining district on the South Fork of the Coeur d'Alene River. This mining district was one of the United States' largest producers of silver, lead, and zinc. And mines in the region, at least 20 different major mines, operated between 1880 and 1985. So there was over a 100-year period of operation. Probably the major producing mine still in the district today is a mine called the Lucky Friday Mine, located near the town of Mullen in Idaho in the mining district. And the Lucky Friday Mine produces lead, silver, and zinc. The Coeur d'Alene mining district is famous for its silver. Very rich silver deposits. In association with the silver was lead and zinc. Historically, through the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and early 80s, a lot of silver was pulled out of these mines but it's basically the zinc and the lead that paid the bills because they were very important industrial metals. We can see a lot of historic pictures in the archives of museums in small towns in the Coeur d'Alene mining district, hard rock mining, underground. Sometimes these mines were pretty deep. Okay, we have to understand a little bit about geography as we talk about water quality in Lake Coeur d'Alene. Here is Lake Coeur d'Alene, over here on the left, the green or the turquoise body of water. And if we go up the South Fork of the Coeur d'Alene River, up in elevation, there's this area that's outlined in red, and this is called the Coeur d'Alene this area is the Coeur d'Alene Mining District. The area in red is actually a Superfund site to clean up the biggest mine that was up here called the Bunker Hill Mine. But upstream we had all these mines. Again, there were 20 major mines at one time, and the mines mined the metals, and in the process of mining, in the process of cleaning the materials, there was a lot of slag that was produced. This slag was deposited near the mines, along the river, and eventually this slag washed down the river and into Lake Coeur d'Alene. There's a proud mining history in this, what we call the Coeur d'Alene Mining District right here. Lots of money was produced in this district. Lots of metal was produced in this district. A large legacy of mining in this district. But the downside was that the mine tailings were deposited close to rivers, and eventually these mine tailings washed down rivers and ended up in Lake Coeur d'Alene. And at the bottom of Lake Coeur d'Alene in the sediments, we have a lot of heavy metals. We look at the legacy. A lot of people call the Coeur d'Alene Mining District the silver capital of the world. This is a coin that was minted in 1983, kind of to celebrate the legacy of mining in the Coeur d'Alene mining area. You can go up to the Coeur d'Alene Mining District and see old mines. Most of them are closed. A legacy of mines from the 1800s. Here's an old mining operation in the mining district. A typical mine. They were built on the hillsides. The ore was pulled out of the ground. It was concentrated on the surface. And in the concentration process, a lot of the slag was piled, and it ended up in the river eventually. Some of the mines had smelters where they actually turned the metals into bars. In the 1970s, most of the smelting process was done out of the area. A lot of the ore was concentrated in the Coeur d'Alene Valley, and then it was shipped to British Columbia to actually be smelted. Here's a mining statue near the Bunker Hill Mine, which is the most famous mine in the Coeur d'Alene Mining District. There's a big mining heritage up there. There's still quite a few people that make their living mining. The one mine that is operating well today is the Lucky Friday mine, which is in Mullen, Idaho. It's pretty close to the Montana border. It's quite a process. I was fortunate enough to go down into the mine once to see the operation. Quite an operation. It's an amazing world down there. It's like a city. We can actually look at a diagram of the Lucky Friday mine, and it shows all the different levels. Here we are at the surface of the soil, and the mine shaft was dug deep, and they're pulling silver from way down, thousands of feet down. Miners go down every day. It's a very hot, humid world down there. It's very hot, and it's basically 100% humidity. But there's a lot of ore down here still to get, a lot of silver ore, and some miners or some people in mining engineering tell you that the ore actually gets richer the deeper you go. On the top, Here's some of the crushed ore coming out of the mine. It's crushed, it's processed, and after it's concentrated, today it's shipped out to British Columbia or other areas to be smelted, to have it highly refined. Time ago, they actually had smelters in the area, and the smelters added lead and things to the environment. So over 20 different mines have been active in this district in the last 100 years. The largest and most famous mine, of course it's closed right now, was the Bunker Hill Mine. This mine produced millions of tons of toxic mine tailings, full of lead and zinc and cadmium and arsenic and things like that. We look at an old-time picture of a mine. Lots of operation to get the ore out of the ground and processed so it could be smelted into bars, but there's tailings all over the place. It gets wet, these tailings wash off the land and into the nearby creek, which is the South Fork of the Coeur d'Alene River. Much of the mining waste, which we call slag, has been discharged directly into the river, the Coeur d'Alene River, or washed, piled, and then washed into the river. So the South Fork of the Coeur d'Alene River basically transported unwittingly these heavy metals to the Lake Coeur d'Alene. So you get the heavy metals in the South Fork of the Coeur d'Alene River, and they eventually made its way to Lake Coeur d'Alene. And on the north end of Lake Coeur d'Alene, some of it made its way into the Spokane River, and some of it made its way into waters, surface and groundwaters of not only Idaho, but of Washington State. So this mining district has been a big concern from a surface water quality standpoint. Probably one of the more spectacular pictures I found was a mining operation where the wastes were just simply put in water, and the water just fed these wastes to water bodies that ended up in the Coeur d'Alene River, that ended up in Lake Coeur d'Alene. So we have some concerns about this mine waste. One of the concerns, the mine tailings from the Coeur d'Alene Mining District, CDMD, have traditionally washed down into Lake Coeur d'Alene. Thus, a large layer of sediment blankets the bottom of Lake Coeur d'Alene with these mine tailings. These mining activities have produced large quantities of waste, and that's what we're concerned about. And many of these wastes are hazardous contaminants. They can have toxic effects on humans, can have carcinogenic effects on humans and animals, and the concerns are lead, zinc, cadmium, arsenic, and mercury. And each one of these in itself is either carcinogenic or toxic to most biological life at high concentrations. Some of these are both carcinogenic and toxic. And remember, one of the reasons the area was mined was because of the large concentrations of lead and zinc. On a side note right now, if you take a look at our coinage in the United States, we have quarters, dimes, nickels, and pennies. A lot of people think pennies are pretty worthless. A penny is 97% zinc. And one of the reasons why we still manufacture pennies in the United States is because of the mining lobby. Pennies are a major use of zinc in the country. And the mining lobby has really lobbied really hard to ensure that we keep producing pennies, even though we think of pennies being copper. They're 97% zinc with a little bit of copper coating. If we look at some of the recent history associated with these wastes in Lake Coeur d'Alene, in 1983, the federal government added the Coeur d'Alene Mining District to the list of Superfund sites to try and clean them up. Again, In the early 80s, these mines started to go bankrupt. Bunker Hill closed. Several of the other mines closed. By 2002, lead levels in residents that lived in the Coeur d'Alene mining district, which is known as the Silver Valley, were above EPA health standards. We had a Superfund cleanup at Bunker Hill. This cleanup has been long and ongoing, and by several measures, it's been successful. The amounts of lead in local soils and other things have decreased exponentially. Soils contaminated with lead were trucked away. Lead levels in children that lived in the Silver Valley slowly went down, and it became a safer environment. But remember, a lot of that stuff, the lead and the zinc, floated down the river and is deposited at the bottom of Lake Coeur d'Alene. So if this stuff was bad for the kids and the residents that lived in the valley, it's surely not good on the bottom of Lake Coeur d'Alene. So by 2002, the federal government was really interested in shifting the focus of the Superfund cleanup from the Silver Valley to Lake Coeur d'Alene. Again, this is the Bunker Hill mine. They're blowing up the towers as remediation has come in here. A lot of the slag piles in the Coeur d'Alene Valley have been removed or covered, or basically they've been protected from possibly going down a river. They're not going to get in the river and not going to get into Coeur d'Alene anymore. The Superfund cleanup was massive. Here's an aerial picture of areas where they remediated, where they scraped off wherever there were heavy metals. They brought in soil. They replanted trees and other things to try and make the environment better. The mining industry, basically through smelting and processing, basically had put so many toxic chemicals in the air of the Silver Valley that the forest stopped growing. So if you had seen the Silver Valley before the Superfund cleanup, it would have looked pretty bad. But today, things have gotten better. So going back to 2002, it was determined to shift the cleanup to other areas of the Coeur d'Alene basin. However, as the plan shifted to other areas of the Coeur d'Alene basin, it did not address the toxic sediment on the bottom of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Technically, the lake is actually part of the Superfund site. However, politics have prevented it from getting a Superfund designation because the locals do not want to have tourists come and recreate in a Superfund site. They want no connection at all with the Superfund site and tourism. And tourism is one of the major economic activities of Kootenai County, where Coeur d'Alene is, and the lake. So basically, local politics prevented Lake Coeur d'Alene from becoming a Superfund site. Politically and economically, people didn't want a Superfund label placed on their lake. Lake Coeur d'Alene is important to the region's economy from a tourism standpoint, from a recreation standpoint. It's important to the region's culture, and it's important to the quality of life. So let's just brush the heavy metals and things that are in the sediment below the lake off and not talk about them. As long as those heavy metals stay at the bottom of the lake in the sediment, they aren't causing any problems. As a result, everybody's enjoying the lake. Kids love the lake, recreation. Kids are out on a boat having fun. You got people paddle boards. They're having a great time on the lake. And you even see people fishing on the lake and hauling in some good fish. But the real issue when we talk about the quality of water in Lake Coeur d'Alene is heavy metal pollution. The mining activities have resulted in heavy metal pollution of Lake Coeur d'Alene. To tourists and the general public, the heavy metal pollution in the lake is invisible. However, it can be a ticking time bomb, and that's what people are very worried about. If we look at this invisible problem in a little bit more detail, on the bottom of Lake Coeur d'Alene, there are over 75 million tons of mine waste sediment. 75 million tons. Again, these materials work their way down the South Fork of the Coeur d'Alene River from the mining district into the lake over the last 100 years. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, 98% of the lead that went down the Coeur d'Alene River, South Fork of the Coeur d'Alene River, migrated into Lake Coeur d'Alene, and it's still there in the sediments. That means over that course of 100 years, over 480 tons of lead were deposited in Lake Coeur d'Alene each year. Again, the vast majority of that lead fell to the bottom of the lake. Our first concern about lead is one of our big uses of water, of course, is for drinking. We know that lead at high concentrations in drinking water is toxic. So that's something that we should be very concerned about. So the issue is we have all these heavy metals in the sediment at the bottom of the lake. Is this a problem? How much of a problem are these sediments? Well, basically, it depends on who you ask. The toxic metals, the cadmium, the arsenic, the lead, the zinc, are sequestered in sediments. They're tied up in sediments in the bottom of Lake Coeur d'Alene. As long as they're sequestered in the bottom of Lake Coeur d'Alene, they're not an immediate public health threat. Well, what makes them not much of a problem? As long as the lake has plenty of oxygen, as long as oxygen levels in the lower reaches of the lake, the lower levels of the lake are high, the metals are trapped in the sediments, and the sediments basically become a sink for the metals. The metals stay there. As long as we don't disturb the sediments, the situation is basically under control. Out of sight, out of mind. However, if we go in there and disturb those sediments, some of those heavy metals may dissolve and contribute to poor water quality of the lake and may actually make the lake unfit for human use. So anything we do that would disturb the sediments at the bottom of the lake is a problem. You have a lot of boat traffic on the lake. You have a lot of churning on the lake. Well, the lake's pretty deep, so for the most part, it doesn't do much to the sediments. All of a sudden, these toxic metals become a problem if oxygen levels in the lower reaches of the lake become low. So near the bottom of the lake where the sediments are, if oxygen levels fall, the solubility of the metals increase, and they could enter the water column and become a problem. Now, the one thing that everybody is worried about that would cause such a thing, that would cause the oxygen levels in the bottom of the lake to be depleted, is the additions of phosphorus to the lake, or phosphorus pollution. Phosphorus pollution indirectly lowers oxygen levels in the water. So what we need to do to protect the lake from the toxic metals is to keep the water as phosphorus-free as possible. If we can do that, we shouldn't have to worry about the heavy metals very much. So our problem is potentially phosphorus. We get too much phosphorus into the lake, the phosphorus causes algae growth. The algae grow. When they die, they fall to the bottom of the lake, and you get decomposers that use free oxygen in the water to decompose the algae. So the more algae growth you get, the less oxygen you have left in the water, and the greater chance you have of the heavy metals becoming solubilized and entering the water column. So, in addition to heavy metals being a problem, the other leg of the problem is phosphorus pollution. Now, we know a lot about phosphorus. Phosphorus is a naturally occurring mineral found in soils and rocks. Much of the phosphorus found in soils is considered biologically active, which means organisms can use the phosphorus for growth. Indeed, phosphorus is an essential element required for plant and animal growth. All plants, all animals require phosphorus. In most pristine lakes in the world, phosphorus is a limiting element for the growth of algae. The lakes are clear. However, if you put phosphorus into the lake through some means, all of a sudden you get the growth of phytoplankton or these green algae. So one of our problems is, how do we put phosphorus in the lake? We don't want to do that. But if we take a look around the lake and the land around the lake, if we lose soil or topsoil or any sediments wash off the land and wash into the lake, we're putting phosphorus in the lake. So if we put phosphorus in non or slow-flowing bodies of water, such as Lake Coeur d'Alene, phosphorus can be a major pollutant. Again, under natural conditions, phosphorus levels in waters are very low. However, around the shore of Lake Coeur d'Alene, we have all these human activities that disturb soils, and if the soils wash into the lake, we are starting to add phosphorus. Phosphorus will promote plant growth in the lake. The plants die. We go through a process called eutrophication, and our net result is oxygen levels in the deeper parts of the lake become depleted. Now, the problem here, if oxygen levels become depleted, all of a sudden these heavy metals become solubilized and can come into the water. So our big issue with Lake Coeur d'Alene is to protect it and prevent our heavy metal problems, we have to modify our activities such that we don't introduce phosphorus to surface water and we don't get these pollution problems. Scientists tell us that phosphorus introductions into Lake Coeur d'Alene resulting from erosion and runoff have greatly increased since 1990. And that's simply due to development. For instance, here's a home on the shore of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Before the home was built, all these soils were covered with trees or shrubbery. As this land has been cleared, you've got bare soils. It rains, any soil can erode off this land directly into the lake. You're putting phosphorus in the lake. If this happens with one home around the lake, very little impact. However, how many homes have been built on the lake shore in the last 20 years? Many hundreds, maybe thousands. You start adding up all these erosion spots, and that means you're adding quite a bit of phosphorus to the water. So some of the things that humans do that add phosphorus to the water of Lake Coeur d'Alene, any road construction near the lake can make soils bare and any sediments wash off into the lake, contributing phosphorus. People that build along the lake and they have yards which have lawns, they fertilize those lawns. The nutrients can wash into the lake. People that have a garden along the shore, the town of Harrison on the east shore of Lake Coeur d'Alene, everybody in that small town basically has a garden. Those soils contain phosphorus. We get a little soil erosion. That runoff adds phosphorus to the lake. Any activities where we disturb soils, where we lose surface plants and disturb the soils, can put phosphorus into the lake. Again, one or two people doing that, not much impact. but all of a sudden Kootenai County has exploded from 30,000 people in 1960 to 170,000 people today. So the amount of activity is fourfold greater than it was back in 1960. So you're going to introduce more and more phosphorus. The southern parts of the lake have a lot of agriculture in the basin. Anytime you have agricultural practices that removes plants from the surface of the soil and you expose bare soils, particularly in the winter, you get erosion, phosphorus runs off. You apply fertilizers to agricultural land. If that phosphorus is not applied correctly and at the right rate, if you apply too much, that phosphorus can run off the land and into the lake, adding P. In forestry, we have a lot of forests along the shore and in the watershed. When you harvest those trees, if you leave the soils bare, some of that soil is going to wash off and put phosphorus in the lake. So you have this cumulative thing. The more human activities, the more phosphorus eventually enters the lake. A couple pictures of this. Oh, here's a road on the north shore of Lake Coeur d'Alene. I think that's our Interstate 90. If you look on both sides of the bridge, you can see bare soils. Major construction project, phosphorus washing off that land into the lake. Look at forestry. When you start harvesting forests, you leave bare soils. Anytime you get rain or anything that washes across those soils, a little phosphorus moves with it and into the lake. Any sediments that enter the lake will contain phosphorus. On the southern part of the lake where you have agricultural products, here you have a drain canal, and basically the water's coming off the land, but in addition to the water coming off the land, so is sediment. Sediment loaded with phosphorus, it's a problem. So to protect the lake and protect its quality, we need to prevent phosphorus additions to water by preventing soil erosion and runoff. One of the things we can do is to preserve native vegetation along the shoreline. Native vegetation prevents soil erosion. We have a lot of techniques to reduce erosion. We call them using what are called best management practices, also abbreviated as BMPs. We have best management practices that we can use in rural areas, on farmland, in forestry, in urban areas for regular residents that have lawns and gardens. If we put these BMPs to work, we can keep phosphorus on the land and away from the lake. If we get too much phosphorus in the lake, we're going to get a downhill cycle and we're going to have problems with heavy metals. So there's lots of BMPs we can use. Well protection, BMPs for farmers, BMPs in urban areas. There's lots of things that we can do to keep phosphorus on the land and out of the lake, and that will protect the quality of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Once in the water, phosphorus is a nutrient that increases growth of aquatic plants. When these aquatic plants die, that's when the problem begins. When the aquatic plants die, they fall to the bottom of the lake. The decomposers break down these dead plants. The decomposers suck oxygen out of the water so they can do their decomposition process. As they suck oxygen out of the water, they deprive the water of oxygen for fish, and they deprive the sediments of oxygen, which can result in a solubilization of these toxic metals. The more dead plants, the less O2 left in the water, and the bigger the problem we have. When the aquatic plants die, again, they fall to the bottom of the lake and decompose. Oxygen is removed deep in the lake. Oxygen is no longer available to fish and other aquatic organisms. And this process is known as eutrophication. We have lots of stagnant bodies of water, particularly lakes, that turn green on the surface in the summer. It's due to this eutrophication process. But eutrophication is a much bigger problem in Lake Coeur d'Alene because it would not only turn the surface water green, but it would release the heavy metals from the sediment below the lake. We occasionally get algae blooms in Lake Coeur d'Alene. They're not very common, but they do occur. Here's one near the southern part of the lake, an algae bloom out in the lake. And we can see some coves where we actually see the water kind of greenish late in the summer because of the algae blooms, which means we've added quite a bit of phosphorus. So we know what we have to do to protect the quality of water in Lake Coeur d'Alene. Right now, the toxic metals in the sediment on the bottom of the lake, as long as undisturbed, are okay for the lake. However, we start disturbing those sediments, we're going to have problems. And finally, I think one of the keys is we need to deal with our population growth in Kootenai County in the Lake Coeur d'Alene watershed. The Kootenai County area is experiencing rapid population growth. Prior to 1970, less than 50,000 people lived in the watershed of Lake Coeur d'Alene. By 2015, over 160,000 people lived in this watershed. It's projected by 2045 that the population in the watershed will be over 225,000 people. Well, that means 225,000 people that contribute to phosphorus. That means the per capita phosphorus contribution to the lake has to keep going down just so we can keep afloat and keep the quality of the water good. So population growth is putting a lot of pressure on the lake. The more people, the greater chances of adding P from the surrounding landscape into the lake. The more phosphorus or P in the lake, the more soluble the heavy metals become, and thus, if we add more P, we will get a downward spiral of water quality in Lake Coeur d'Alene. If we keep the phosphorus out, the quality of water in Coeur d'Alene, as long as the sediments on the bottom of the lake are not disturbed, will be good. Thank you for your attention. So here's the city of Coeur d'Alene. Here's some urban development across the Rathdrum Prairie, and then we get into the Spokane Valley. This is a state line right here between Washington and Idaho. So we've got all these mines up here, the waste, all these mines in the green dots. The waste historically ended up in the Coeur d'Alene River, which worked its way down to Lake Coeur d'Alene. Most of those sediments deposited at the bottom of the lake and sat there, but some would leak out into the Spokane River and eventually end up in Washington. So there's a political fight between Idaho and Washington historically. Washington saying don't dump your waste in Washington, and several times the state of Washington has actually sued the state of Idaho for putting these wastes into the state of Washington.